A little bit faster every single lap. Here at the end of this race, Thomas starting to pull away. At the bell, it's Leah Thomas moving away from Emma Wyatt. Brooke 40 into third.
Wyatt right up there against that lane line. She's having a great race here, and she's going to get second. That will give her a lot of confidence. Remember, she's just a freshman.
Leah Thomas pulling away over the final 150 meters. Had to work for it. She was pushed over the first 350 meters. Thomas wins the NCAA championship. Ended up very close for second, with Wyatt taking it.
With Leah Thomas's recent victories, there's been lots of debate in the swimming community and the world about whether she is a revolutionary or a robber. What many people don't recognize is that this is just the tip of the massive iceberg considering equality and equity in sports, and what is considered an advantage or a disadvantage, and how we can make sports fair for all in our ever-evolving and changing future. As more people begin to explore their gender identities and begin to embrace who they truly are with things like hormone replacement, the basis of gendered sports as a whole comes into question, along with recent study findings that point towards very stark differences between cisgender and transgender individuals and how that can affect their athletic performance. Sports are having to make some drastic changes very soon to continue to offer the same fair experiences they have offered for years to people of all ages. Whether that be in favor of equality for transgender athletes or equity based on proven and biological ability, it is uncertain where the NCAA and other sports organizations may lie. It is easy to be able to see both sides and why there is a demand for equality and equity, but it's much harder to understand that only one can be achieved and the other must be sacrificed. It's important to start with looking at the facts and to determine your position by your own means, and not be constrained to what the media misleads one to do, but for one to have a solid and well thought out perspective that aligns with their moral compass, which is exactly what this podcast is trying to do. Leah Thomas is a transgender swimmer who competed for the University of Pennsylvania. Leah first started her college career competing as a male and did so for 3 seasons. She started hormone replacement therapy in 2019, and after taking the 2020 to 2021 season off due to COVID, she competed as a woman in the 2021 to 2022 season. At the NCAA D1 championship meet, she won the 500 freestyle and beat Olympic silver medalist Emma Wyatt by 1.75 seconds. This victory caused public outroar, and comments has been subjected to a lot of hatred. This hatred towards Leah is very unjust, because she didn't do anything wrong according to the NCAA's rules. Targeting an individual for doing something that's completely legal in an organization's rules is wrong. If someone has a problem with her competing as a woman, they shouldn't have a problem with her. They should have a problem with the NCAA rules that allowed it. The NCAA requirements for the 2021 to 2022 season were the same as the USA Swimming Guidelines, that required athletes to be below 5 nmol/L for a minimum period of 36 months, and have a second piece of criteria that states there needs to be evidence that the athlete's prior physical development as a male does not give them a competitive advantage approved of by a doctor. The second requirement is quite vague in the means of these advantages, but still was a requirement nonetheless. Currently, the Olympic requirements are the same as the USA Swimming at the moment as well. The NCAA guidelines are now under study on a sport-by-sport basis to determine what is equal and what is not in these sports after the recent uproar. It is likely that all sports committees will soon be reviewing their standards as well. Though it is uncertain the outcomes of this study by the NCAA, we can look at the report done by Sports Medicine by Hilton and Lindbergh that explored lots of data regarding how much physical ability is lost when athletes transition from male to female. It was shown that even though the transgender individuals went through hormone therapy, their strength and muscle mass did not significantly change as a result of it. It was actually found that depending on the activity, that transgender individuals, specifically male to female, had a 10 to 50% advantage over the competitors. Another study on transgender Air Force service members indicated that even with hormone replacement therapy, the advantages transgender athletes gained through puberty could not be mitigated by these therapies. These advantages, such as a higher mean height and larger extremities such as hands or feet, along with an overall higher muscle mass, all generally correlated with those individuals having an advantage over their competitors. When looking at this from an equity standpoint, it's easy to see why a person with these viewpoints would not want especially male to female transgender athletes competing, because they hold such a strong advantage over cisgender women who have worked equally hard to get to the position they are in today. People do seem to forget that even though it has been shown that male to female transgender athletes could have an advantage over their cisgender counterparts, they are also at a disadvantage when competing against cisgender males. In an interview with Sports Illustrated, Lia Thomas notes that after starting hormone replacement therapy, she noticed that she has shrunk 2 inches, she didn't have the strength she used to have, and her body fat had been redistributed. This, she says, resulted in her unable to maintain the same times and paces she had held before the therapy. In swimming, especially in endurance events that she competes in, pacing is crucial to your success. The faster a person can pace, the faster they can swim in a race. With the physical differences Lia has experienced, it is unlikely that she will ever be able to swim as fast as she did before the hormone replacement therapy. This shows that male to female athletes after hormone replacement therapy do lose strength and typically can't compete and train at the levels they did before the therapy. Even though they may hold a possible advantage over their cisgender competitors, male to female transgender athletes are not as strong or as fast as cisgender males due to the therapy. When looking at it from an advantage-based perspective, putting these athletes back into competing with the cisgender males, they would have a disadvantage. This puts these athletes into a sort of limbo, because if they still hold an advantage over cisgender women and a disadvantage when competing against cisgender men, then where should they compete? An important thing to keep in mind is that there hasn't been tons of research on this topic just yet. And as the years go by, we will be able to get an even more detailed look into just how much of an advantage or disadvantage these transgender athletes possess, if any at all. Looking at this from a different segment of the equality standpoint, a new viewpoint emerges. After all, a sport is more than just about winning. It's about the sense of community, love, and respect for one another in a place where we share a common interest. This woman is a woman, nonetheless, even though she was given the body of a man at birth. When looking at equality, it would be horrific to stop a woman from competing just because she may or may not have an advantage that she did not want nor could control. For someone with a moral compass pointing towards equality, support for Lia Thomas would be almost unanimous. Placing females in male competitions would be wrong and invalidate their gender and could potentially lead to other issues. Next, we will look from the perspective of 2 athletes actively competing in NCAA college swimming, along with a very experienced coach. I interviewed 2 members of the Rollins College swim scoring team, Sydney Willis and Ward Lockhart, on this topic, and the head coach of Winter Park Blue Dolphins swim team. I first interviewed Sydney Willis, a well-accomplished senior on the Rollins College swim scoring team. Did you ever notice a big advantage or disadvantage of girls versus guys on your teams?
I think growing up, I definitely noticed there was a difference. I think the difference kind of shifts as you get older. I know that like girls tend to mature faster. So like in the younger age groups, girls tend to be bigger and stronger. But then as you get older, the boys tend to gain muscle mass. In terms of actual like advantage and speed and strength, I think that like, yes, generally men tend to be faster and stronger than women. I also think there's a lot of other factors that contribute, though, just outside of purely if someone is male or female.
To your knowledge, do you think that transgender athletes, specifically male to female, following the regulations that have been set in place, still hold these advantages if there is, or do you think they hold any advantages over cisgender competitors to make it unfair to those cisgender competitors?
Yeah, so I want to, I guess, start off by saying that I don't know anyone who's openly transgender in my life outside of sports or in college athletics. So I'm not able to speak on their behalf, but I am an ally and I want to advocate for what I believe in and help in any way that I can. I don't personally believe there's really any advantage for transgender athletes in, say, like if someone transitioned from male to female. I think for me, the biggest concern is mental health of athletes. And I think that one of my main points is that mental health tends to be worse in transgender people. And if there's anything that can kind of be helped, it's their mental health. And I think that should be acknowledged in any way, in every way possible, including them in sports, if that's something that they want to do. But in terms of advantages, to go back to your question, I think that I don't know. I don't know enough about the topic. I don't know enough about hormone science and all that. So I can't really speak on that other than in my opinion. I think that unless there's some kind of scientific proof, like I'm for allowing transgender athletes to participate.
So if you could talk to someone on the other side of this conversation, someone that would be against these transgender athletes competing, what would you say to them to try to advocate for your side?
I first would let them know that I can try my best to understand where they're coming from, if they also try to understand where I'm coming from. I think that while sports and winning is very important to some people, I think the bigger impact of participation in sports from a young age to college age and even into professional athletics is something that shouldn't be regulated without serious consideration for everyone involved. Like I mentioned earlier, I think for me, mental health is a huge part of that. And anything that is proven to help mental health, I think shouldn't be hindered, or people shouldn't be prohibited from doing that thing. I know one point of argument that people mention is the swimmer Leah Smith and her so-called advantages in the Ivy League or NCAA championship. And while I'm aware that she won a lot of events, I think a counter argument is that she's also not the fastest woman to ever compete in Ivy League or NCAA championships or anywhere like that. So I just think that the main thing that I would like people to consider is just overall health of other people and consideration of their well-being. And I know that there's a negative emotional impact from losing too, but that's part of sports and that's something you have to be willing to accept.
Thank you. Next, we will interview Ward Lockhart. He has been competitively swimming for 14 years, and in his high school career, he was the two-time Alabama state champion. Now, in his first official college season competing for Rollins College, he is the current NCAA Division II champion in the men's 500 and 1,000 freestyle. Did you ever notice a big advantage or disadvantage in girls versus guys when swimming in speed or power or both?
I definitely say more so speed than power, but I mean definitely a good bit of both, but more speed than power. Men are just capable of moving through water faster, it seems.
What do you think can be attributed to these differences?
I think just when men go through puberty and they start, producing testosterone, and that's what enables men to, I guess, have more strength and more endurance and just overall greater athletic ability, which allows them to perform better in the water.
Do you think that with the regulations and requirements set by the NCAA that male to female transgender athletes possess advantages over cisgender athletes?
Oh yeah, I definitely think they do. Even with like hormone therapy and everything, I definitely think they do, because they still have, I guess, the facilities, for lack of a better word, to continue to produce testosterone, unlike their biological female counterparts.
Do you think this is fair to cisgender competitors?
No, not at all. I don't think it's fair.
What do you think should be done in the future regarding this?
I think you should just only be allowed to compete under your biological sex that you're assigned at birth and nothing else. Because unless you just start taking estrogen, before the age of like 11, then you're always going to have an advantage going up against women if you're transitioning from male to female, regardless of anything like hormone therapy.
All right, thank you for your response. For our last interview, we have Joe Auer. He has been coaching for over 30 years and owns a USA club team, the Winter Park Blue Dolphins. He has trained several Olympic trial qualifiers and national record holders. Prior to coaching, he swam at the University of Florida. When coaching your swimmers from the poolside, is there a noticeable difference in the speed and strength of male versus female swimmers?
Well, speed first. Definitely speed, because there's a lot more power with a guy swimmer versus a girl swimmer. I do have lots of girls that are very, very fast. But all being equal, if you put a bunch of guys in there and you put a bunch of girls in there, I do see a difference in the speed for guys. As far as strength and that type of thing, I mean, it's just a big difference. I do see a big difference in the strength, the speed, and what a guy athlete can do versus a girl athlete. Even though I think that girls are probably a little tougher than guys. Over the 30 years that I've seen, I've seen the girls be a little tougher than guys. I don't know why, but it's that way.
What do you think attributes to this difference in speed and strength?
Well, guys, I without getting too crazy scientific, it's just growing up. I think guys, I think an athletic guy and an athletic girl, they do have big differences, but what they do outside, like let's say a Florida athlete, a Texas athlete, a California athlete, climbing trees, guys will climb trees. They'll go outside all day. They'll be doing stuff outside all day. Testosterone versus estrogen. The guys are just stronger and do different things than girls, from 0 to 20, let's say. So there is a big difference that way.
With your knowledge of hormone therapy and transgender athletes, specifically male to female, do you think that these athletes pose an advantage compared to the cisgender athletes?
I think they do. Based on, and I know we've seen a lot of stuff lately. I think will take a lot longer than what is out there right now. I think USA Swimming says they have to be a certain level for only 2 years, which I think needs to be longer, especially as the athlete gets older. I think track may be a little different. I think FINA, which is the worldwide governing body, is a little different. But I think they need to be a lot longer than just a year or 2 years or 3 years to get them where to the level of what it would be fair for a girl or a transgender athlete racing each other.
Would you be in support of having a male to female transgender, any transgender athlete compete against anyone in your team in the future? Do you think it would be fair?
Definitely will not be fair. And, we've seen a lot of this lately, and I've talked to a lot of different coaches all over the country about it. And what I do think is it may be time as we get more and more of these athletes, whether it be male or female transgender athlete, to create another division. I just think it would be cleaner to do it that way. That way we'd have a male, we'd have a female, and then we'd have another division. That's the quick answer. If it's a younger situation, maybe it's different, but I do think that, maybe it's just a different thing altogether.
Are there any other steps that you think USA Swimming or any athletic governing bodies should take in the future to address this topic? Any others that you haven't mentioned before?
They probably need some training for coaches on this topic, just kind of give them a little more knowledge about the athletes. But then also, we all do need to look at a little deeper into the competition and the athlete and that type of thing, and just see what would be fair. Maybe even, if we look back to swimming, what's been going on this past spring and winter, they probably shouldn't have let some of those swimmers compete in a national championship before really diving into all the problems that they may have. I think they were trying to please everybody, and really that ended up being the total opposite of what happened. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I do think that they just jumped the gun and tried to make everybody happy, and that was definitely not the right thing to do.
All right. Thank you for your responses.
Based on the wildly different responses from both a male and female competitor on the Rollins swim team and a USA Swimming club coach, it's safe to say the opinion on this issue is quite mixed in the swimming community and the world. I think with all of this back and forth argument, we're missing a really important point that people don't seem to really think about. After all, there can be so many different factors that can lead these individuals to have an advantage or a disadvantage that goes beyond just them transitioning. The human race is so diverse that we can't look at just the fact that they transitioned as the only advantage or disadvantage they have. Some humans are naturally gifted with height and the ability to build muscle faster than others, and other abilities that can be advantageous in athletics. Along with this, some people are quite disadvantaged with things like height or muscle mass, and some people have health issues like heart conditions or scoliosis that can make them have less of a so-called advantage than others. Also, there's people that break the barriers of these advantages and are still able to perform better than people who might seem to have an advantage over them. Even thinking on a further level, different sports require different skills or abilities that may be a disadvantage in other sports. In gymnastics, for example, it's advantageous to be short, as it works better to perform gymnastic moves. But in a sport like basketball, one of the best advantages a person could have would be tall. In a world of so many diverse people, why do we need to focus so much on gender being the only way to divide a sport to make it fair? Why couldn't we just get rid of that system? and replace it with one that focuses on advantages that go beyond gender or even age. What if there was a system for every sport that could be split by advantage and ability, rather than age and gender? This could encourage success on every level, and might actually be more equitable than the system we have in place now. An example of the system in place now being faulty would be how a person that's in perfect health, that is lean, that has quick muscle recovery and muscle retention, would have to compete against someone who might have a slower metabolism, might not be as lean, and might not retain muscle or recover as fast as the person I mentioned before. Those two individuals would have to compete against each other if they were the same gender and the same age. Sure, the second person may be able to achieve a more lean look and build more muscle and might get pretty good at that said sport. But it's going to take a lot more effort on their side compared to the first individual with all those genetic gifts they have. Is it really fair or equitable to expect these individuals to compete and have a fair chance at winning? A better idea would be to restructure swimming and, for that fact, all the other sports, to be able to measure and put people in groups that would encourage personal growth and not condemn them as better or worse than someone who is so wildly different than them. This would take gender out of the equation and promote a pure sense of equity. This idea could be a solution, but it would take years to implement and an army to manage. But more importantly, it could potentially solve the issue of gender in sports for good and continue to preserve sports for the next generation in a more inclusive and encouraging way, so that the next generation can embrace their gifts and not be expected to be at a level of other people that might be different than them. Overall, this is a very complex issue, with not much availability for motion on either side of the argument for change. The opinions and subsequent decisions people make usually align with their moral compass and just how they view transgender individuals in general, which is something that's quite difficult to change. And concerning the main issue in this debate about proving if they have an advantage or a disadvantage, there's not really one true answer yet. But hopefully there'll be one in the future. But hopefully with the facts and the perspectives given in this podcast today, you can come to a consensus in your head on where you stand on this issue. Thank you for listening.